Welcome to Identity Center Live. I am Jeff, and that is Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey Jeff, man, you did such an awesome job with putting basically the whole live stream together. But that intro, like the countdown from 10 to 1, I mean, kudos.
Well, thank you very much. A fan of some of the services that are out there to help creators like myself. It's weird to say that I'm a creator, but I guess that's
You're a
what I am
creator,
now.
man.
Yeah. One of those
Yeah,
YouTube, a personality. I don't know if I'm a YouTube personality, but
yeah.
certainly a personality.
We're like the Nelk brothers without all the destruction and pranks and stuff like that, right?
I like to think of it more like the odd couple. I think that's probably a better fit, even though we get along so well. Um, Definitely different lifestyles, statures, physiques, you name it. But we both like
Yeah,
identity.
we both like identity. I actually think we like a lot of the same things too. You're more willing to go out and get them, and I'm like, I don't know. It's like we had a conversation about the different types of um, earbuds. So we're talking about like I have like the Generation Two iPod or AirPods, and the reason I like them actually is not because they're cheap. It's because they don't fall out of my ear. And I've
Kind of
tried
important for
a couple.
earbuds.
Yeah, it's very important because they don't just fall down on the ground and then stay there. They fall down on the ground and then they shoot out under a piece of furniture, or if you're in the gym, it's under a piece of equipment. Anyway, I don't like to do that, but the AirPod Max is something I would love to try, but at that I'm way too cheap. Like I can't just take the Benjamins out of my pocket or scan the credit card for, I guess 450 plus tax, right?
Yeah, I think its retail is like 550. I keep seeing sales were like $100 off every once in a while, but I have a pair. I wasn't sold on them right away. I'm a little bit of a headphone junkie, so I have those, and I also have some Sony XM4s that I like over ear kind as well as the earbuds. But um, the AirPods are the ones that I reach for the most. I'm on a Mac for the most part. It just works really well. It sounds great. The noise cancellation is awesome, and it's a little thing, but the hear through, so like we're piping in outside audio in, sounds by far the most natural of any of these earbuds that have that ambient kind of sound to them. It sounds like almost natural. It's crazy.
It's kind of like virtual reality versus augmented reality.
Kind of, yeah.
Kind of reminds me. I mean, I think most people who watch our live stream also listen to our audio podcast, but just in case folks don't, we do a weekly audio podcast. So it's slightly different format. It's Jeff and I plus a guest, or in some cases, we've had more than one guest on a single episode, but typically one. We've had some really good guests recently. We recorded with Julie Smith. What was that? Was that 2 days ago?
2 days ago, yeah.
And that's going to be for IM Day. Um, and we recorded with Dan Creed from Meta, and that was a lot different than our typical episode, right? We talked
Yeah.
about the metaverse. We talked about um, campaigns to create fake accounts for the purpose of putting out misinformation, disinformation on social media, and some of the challenges. And then what blew me away was, of course, the scale at which they operate. I mean, we already knew that they have a lot of identities, but the number 3 billion just kind of blew me away because that's like half of the earthly population.
Yeah, 3 billion is that's a whole lot of people. I can't imagine the identity things that kind of have to go behind the scenes. I'm pretty sure that they've got things like IGA kind of solved. I would hope with 3 billion people, especially if you're trying to manage the internal workforce, because I think they have like 100,000 people or something like that, even just from an employee standpoint. So even though they have 3 billion people, from a employee count perspective, they're still, I would say still certainly large. If it's 50,000 or 100,000 people, still a lot of people. But there's plenty of companies that have more employees. They just don't have as many customers as
Right.
that. Yeah.
We work with some tech companies, and they don't really have IGA solved because usually when a firm is doing IGA, it's to address the fact that they need to be in compliance with some regulation like Sarbanes-Oxley, SOC 2, something like that. And if they don't have a tool, they just start doing it the way you would do it with spreadsheets and email. And but I think to your point, Meta probably isn't doing that.
Yeah, I think they've been
I
around
would
long
be
enough.
surprised. We don't know. We
We
don't
don't
have
know.
any
Yeah.
information on that.
We actually didn't cover it. I really enjoyed the episode with Dan. It was, metaverse. It was really kind of got to kind of geek out a little bit and sort of the technology side of things, self-driving vehicles. So that comes out this Monday, which would be March 28th. So look for that with Dan Creed from Meta, aka Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, I mean, whatever else that's out there. Oculus, although it's something else now. I don't remember the actual name, but the VR stuff that they work on. So, should we talk about? Oh, you mentioned before we get to our main topic for today. You mentioned Identity Management Day. We did record with Julie Smith, her 4th appearance on the show this week. That'll be coming out in a couple weeks. Identity Management Day is April 12th. It's the Tuesday. So you can head over to idsalliance.org and kind of find out more information about that and how to be part of it. Jim and I are certainly big supporters of it. We have been for, I think this is the 3rd year now that they've been doing it, and it keeps getting kind of bigger and better. So that'll be kind of a cool day to kind of celebrate IAM. But let's get to our main sort of topic for today. I don't know if you heard, it might have gotten, kind of covered over with other things that are happening in the world, but yeah, Okta had a little bit of a problem earlier this week.
Right.
Any thoughts on that, Jim?
Well, I think my first thought is I've been reading a lot of different analysis of what's happened, and it's kind of the same information over and over again because there's not a whole lot of information out. This Lapsus group came out, posted some screenshots to say, hey, we got access. It sounds like the attack vector was by gaining the credentials of a support agent or a support engineer. Not sure. Okta kind of came out and said, hey, the breach has been contained to the extent of what a support engineer can do. No idea what that means,
Right.
And so, ultimately, if I'm a customer of Okta, and by the way, I think this could happen to any organization or any IDP, right? So I don't want to pick on Okta too much because if they got phished, if somebody who works for them got phished, or, as we're going to look at some of the things that are going on in the world, insider threat, in other words, somebody wound up getting paid off to kick out their credentials or whatever. The problem is
we don't know what exactly how the breach took place on the third party. I think that's the important thing.
Right. So then we're kind of in the position where we have to kind of at least figure out what do we do if we're a customer of Okta. What do we do? I found a really good article from what was the company?
Was it Cloudflare?
Cloudflare, right?
Yeah, let me load it up.
A customer of Okta. They've got a blog article that they did, kind of covering how they dealt with the issue, and the main thing was to have all of their users, go out and reset their passwords, or at least the ones that they identified may have been compromised. We know the NIST guideline is not to have people change their passwords unless there's a suspicion that it's been breached. I think that if you are an Okta customer, that you have that suspicion now, and whether or not it's been breached or not, you don't know. I say take the cautious step. I mean, as an IAM program manager, that would be the approach that I would take.
Yeah, I think this is a lesson in transparency and communications during a crisis. Okta is a huge company. They have a lot riding on things, from a public perception standpoint, especially as a publicly traded organization. So, immediately when a big player in a space like this, has some sort of security event, it's going to make news. And, trying to dodge around answers and not having even the full answer available can be somewhat detrimental. I haven't looked at the Okta stock price today, but It probably suffered a bit this week as a result of this. Even if it was a third party that kind of breached it, their investigation and the kind of their official statement is basically, hey, this third party engineer, got compromised somehow, and there was some limited access. What I think they have to be careful about what they put out there from a public statement perspective, obviously, because there's probably legal ramifications and things like that. They kind of throw their vendor under the bus here a little bit. Certainly, the vendor apparently didn't send them the full kind of report of the breach timeline from January when it was noticed until really earlier this week, which is when those screenshots apparently came to light, at least on the Okta side. But even then, I think, when they say what their customers should be doing, even they say is like, we don't think you guys need to do an investigation, but kind of do what you want. I would have been a lot stronger to say, hey, look, we think we're good, but we would encourage you to also double check your systems to make sure that things are okay. If we miss something, let us know immediately. No organization's perfect. There's going to be mistakes. Humans, are what we are. So there are things that happen. But I think this is where having a good crisis response and understanding that where they're at in a positioning standpoint in the access space is something that probably a lesson for improvement for next time. I don't work for Okta, and I don't have any dog in the race, so to speak, but it certainly was an interesting approach to basically say, yeah, we think our customers are fine. Okay, well,
thanks.
Think isn't good. We don't, I don't want to build a strategy on, well, I think it's okay.
Well, I mean, look, like that Cloudflare blog and kind of what they did, I think that in Okta's position, they ought to be putting out similar guidelines.
Yep.
Here's what you should do.
Yeah.
Maybe that's yet to come, but I mean, those are things like, to your point, if you have, this is not an unforeseeable event.
Yeah.
This is something that could be planned for. Somebody goes out on Twitter, dumps a screenshot that they've got access.
Yeah. I don't want to dump on Okta too much. I mean, they got breached. Happens to everybody. Microsoft was part of the same breach. Part of their source code for some of their apps were taken. They're certainly not alone in this. I think this is more of just the public perception and the transparency. And I know I was kind of following Twitter the day that it happened, and I saw a lot of folks kind of picking apart the response to some degree.
Yeah.
But
right. I mean, and that's what I'm kind of doing, but
yeah. Well, yeah.
It just jumps right out.
Opinions are our own. Right? Let's put the disclaimer out there. This is just kind of what we think. We don't know all the details, so we only go based on the information that's out there and the response from Okta and what it looks like, etc. So, what I thought was interesting about this whole thing was this group behind, allegedly, let's put that out there, allegedly behind this breach called Lapsus, which I think is how you said it. And I saw this article on Krebs on security. Brian Krebs does an amazing job in security space, where he kind of started to dissect what does this Lapsus group look like. And I was reading through it, and what struck me is a couple things. One, apparently it's a bunch of teenagers in at least maybe the UK area, United Kingdom or England or something like that, so far, and teenagers doing this type of thing. And the way that they approached getting this information, it almost seemed like we've talked about this before, is a business within the business of cybercrime. So the first part is, how do you establish a foothold within an organization and basically have an avenue to compromise, right? Do you gain someone else's credentials? Do you have a backdoor installed? Whatever it may be. And the second part then is actually like the ransomware part or whatever other malicious activity you're trying to do, which is, okay, I will sell you access to a company. That's the first, criminal group. And then another criminal group might go in and buy that access and say, okay, now we're going to do our thing and conduct extortion or ransomware or whatever it may be. Sometimes it's the same group, but this is becoming now a business within, the area of access. And one of the things that I was noticing as we went through this article was this this comment from Microsoft. They wanted to buy credentials from their targets. So now this leads me to believe is, do you trust your workforce?
Yeah.
Because I feel, we've had this discussion before on a podcast, but I feel like everybody has a number. If someone walked up to you and said, hey, I will give you X number of dollars or Bitcoin or whatever currency, right? To give me your ID and password for the organization you work for, what would it take to get that? Sometimes the number is going to be so unrealistic, unreasonable, the risk is small. But what if you are a first line worker, maybe a help desk agent? You might be minimum wage or very low wage, comparatively speaking, and someone comes along and says, hey, we'll give you $20,000 a week to perform inside jobs.
Right. And the people they're going after are usually, well, let's say you're a call center agent, right? That's kind of what what Okta pointed to. You're a call center agent. You're not making 20,000 a week. You might be making
20,000
a year.
Maybe 40,000 a year. Yeah.
Yeah.
I started off in help desk, so I understand the motivations behind it. You're right. You're preying on greed, and you're preying on, the ability to make a quick buck, and untraceable, and it's safe, and don't worry about it, and things like that. But
right.
If I'm a CISO and I'm thinking, okay, well, do I trust my folks? You would hope the answer is yes. But as one of the CISOs that I used to work for, Mr. Camelli would say, trust but verify. So, okay, if we're putting people into a trust situation where you have the ability to access customer information or, company information or whatever it might be, what do you have for guardrails to make sure that access is appropriately scoped, least privilege? There are controls in place to make sure that things are logged, monitored, audited, whatever it may be, to make sure that, people are hopefully doing the right thing with the access out there. But, if someone came up to me and let's say I'm a, first level person at just pick any company. Someone said, hey, I'll give you 20,000. No, 20? How about 40, 50? What is their number? At some point,
price?
All you need is one person, right? That's the thing about information security is you have to be right 100% of the time if you're on defense. The attacker only has to be right once, or maybe a couple times if you're trying to string things together.
I want to say something, which is that, the things you're talking about, it's not FUD factor, right? It's not, you're just not pulling these things out to scare people. That screenshot that's right there is actually the note from the Lapsus team, the recruiting note where they're trying to get that 20,000. And this is an article by Brian Krebs, a very reputable reporter in the InfoSec space, right? This is really happening. And so a couple things that I think of, and the first thing is that, I think one of the focuses in an article that we're going to jump to at one point is that organizations are primarily focused on privileged access management. So privileged access management is generally not something that's held by support agents, people who are taking phone calls. But there's two things to that. One is, I think the mode of attack a lot of times is data exfiltration, and then look at what this is. This is causing a lot of consternation for Okta. Whether or not they actually have any real data or not, we don't know. Maybe I'm kind of concerned, like maybe Okta doesn't even know the extent of how far they got, right? They're afraid to say it's only this far and then have the next round of screenshots come out and then they lose credibility, right? So maybe that's why they're a little bit on edge. And I think that's a big part of what I want to talk about next, which is really,
I think before you get there, it's like that delay to know to make sure you have all the facts before you start talking is important. So I can understand some delay on there, right? You don't want to be like, oh, we said one thing, and then the group comes out and it's like, oh no, actually, right? The other thing too is this is the only one they know about. Right? There could be other ones that we don't know about. Every organization is gonna be the same, but go ahead. Sorry.
Well, if we take the Okta chain of events at face value, the company didn't go back to Okta and try to ransom them to say we're going to dump the screenshot on the internet unless you pay us, right? That wasn't part of the chain of events as far as I saw. So you kind of got to wonder, but I mean, just think about it. Like, if you have this screenshot and you put it out there, you wind up causing all these problems for Okta. You make their stock price go down. They lose the value of the company actually is impacted by this event, at least in the short term.
Yeah.
So
Market manipulation is a big one here.
you don't need privileged access management to cause problems.
This is true.
Now, the other thing is, like, most hackers I don't think start off with and log into the VPN with a, domain administrator credential, right? They log in with some lowly credential and then escalate privileges or look for, hashes on the machines they're able to take over, or try to replay other well-known attacks to kind of work their way up the chain, and eventually, if they can get domain administrator credentials, or they can get enough credentials that they can get in and exfiltrate or encrypt really sensitive data, now they've got a game. So it's not like privileged access management is the only thing that you should worry about. And then I would also say, based on my experience, most organizations, when they get privileged access management, at some point you've got to draw the line of this is privilege and this is not privilege. And that line is generally north of accounts that, have some power, right? It's usually like the most powerful accounts, the keys to the kingdom. It's like, and it makes sense. Yeah, you should start there, but then you got to keep going, right?
Yeah.
It's not just privilege. It's also power users or whatever.
How do you define power or privilege? I think is an important part of this, because it's like, okay, domain admin on Active Directory or Windows, of course, root, things like that on Unix, or other types of well-known, well-documented. And this is a struggle I think every organization faces when they're trying to implement privileged access management. Look, they want to do the right thing, but they can only do what they know about. And if you have applications that are built outside of the scope of maybe a well-known authorization structure like an LDAP or Active Directory or whatever it may be, you rely on the application developers to appropriately scope those permissions and communicate how those permissions are being worked on, used and leveraged, to then make a decision on, okay, should, access to customer data that has, in the US, SSN is, still considered critical information, even though it seems like everyone's has been leaked at this point. Is that privileged access? Could be, might be. Are there other controls in place to kind of audit that? I think that definition of privilege is a big one, because the other one I see too is social media accounts. I think historically, InfoSec has not really necessarily kept up to date with that, and they just let the marketing team kind of do whatever they want to do, or whoever's in charge of the social media accounts. What if, in addition to the screenshots coming out, someone had also hijacked a social media account for the same company and corroborated or further, did more damage in some way? I mean, that's one of the methods that this group does, is they gain access, and then they sit in on the calls of the people who are trying to fix the issues. I wish I could find it here as I'm looking for it, but I'll put the link to this in our show notes when we're done. But one of the things that they do is like, okay, we've got credentials, and then they go and they join the Zoom call and gloat while people are trying to figure out how to fix it. So kind of interesting.
At some level, these don't seem like very sophisticated attacks, but they're very brazen, right? To go after paying off the support engineers, or support agents. The other thing is, like, 20,000 a week. Like, in order to be able to afford paying people 20,000 a week for for them to be accomplices in these crimes, you've got to have a lot of income. Yep. So, they must be collecting big ransom somewhere in order to be able to afford to do that.
Yeah, I think the
other thing
so one of the things I saw in this was like the budget for something was like $100K if they're looking for like zero, if they want to buy like a 0 day, and there's a finder's fee if you put someone in touch, right? So even if you don't sell it, but you make an introduction, you're getting a cut somewhere of it. So there's a lot of money to be made in this for sure.
I think what you were talking about earlier with the trust but verify, I think that this is what's driven the whole idea of zero trust. It's like locking down the systems. But I mean, at this point, you've got these insiders. So for me, if I was trying to explain zero trust to a total IT newbie, I would say the traditional mode was outsiders you don't trust them, insiders you do trust them. Insiders mean on this side of the firewall, you're one of the good guys, and we're going to have less controls in terms of giving you access. But if you're on the outside, we're going to have extra controls, and that's what the zero trust. So, if you take that definition, it's really like now we're saying, okay, these folks who are on the inside are actually potential attackers as well. We need to stop and treat them and outsiders in the same way from this system standpoint. The real concern here is that the people are authenticated. So now you get into that CARTA model of continuous authentication, which I don't know. I mean, if you have to look at it like an attack by attack basis to see whether or not that would solve the issue here. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was just kind of this evolution in my mind of what IAM is. And I think the traditional definition of IAM, like we say, who has access to what, the Gartner definition has kind of traditionally been ensuring the right people have the right access to the right whatever system data. But I feel like the evolution has become that they have the right access and it's being used appropriately, which is a whole other mechanism to layer on top of it, which is the logging. It's the artificial intelligence to be able to make good decisions or to see that, hey, things are happening anomalously in our environment and we should, either investigate or take action and prevent, potential further loss. So again, screenshots, probably not the end of the world, but if they continued on and went into certain databases and really started to hit, and then you start saying, what is this person who works in the call center hitting this database or scanning the environment, hitting like 500 IP addresses in an hour? That doesn't make sense. And then triangulating, because I think traditionally IT departments have attacked the issue from an IP layer perspective. Oh, now we have this IP address and he's scanning all these IPs, right? That's trigger one. Trigger two is now this account is doing things that are not normal for this account, and triangulating that data, that's the real key. So to me, that's kind of the, one of the next generations of controls for IAM is really not only who has access to what and ensuring they have the right people have the right access, but also that they're doing the things they should be doing with that access.
Yeah, and to get there, you've got to solve who has access to what, but you've also got to be able to do something with all that data you're collecting, right? Whether it's going to a SIM or some other analysis tool to try and bubble that stuff up. It's a challenge I think a lot of organizations struggle with. I've certainly seen it in the past as well, where there's so many logs and so many things going on, is what's real and what's not, and how do you make sure that the time that you're spending doing that analysis is not chasing down something that is not relevant, not important, versus the ones that are, that do look a little more suspicious. And I think that's where tools like the AI and the machine learning and all other stuff that's out there can certainly lend a hand to, for sure. It's I wish, part of me is like, okay, I wish this had been solved already. I would be out of a job if it had been. But I do think it's getting better, but it's still not great. Like, I think big companies that have the budget to spend on information security consistently are probably doing okay. And that could be any number of reasons. It could be because they've invested the tools, they've got the people, the process, whatever it might be, and they have the budget to do it. The smaller businesses or small organizations, the ones that have historically not invested as much in security, they are constantly playing this like catch-up game. Like, okay, we're going to invest a bunch of money to catch up, and then they stop, and they fall behind again, and they've got to invest a bunch of money to catch back up again, and then they stop. I think it's that consistent. How do you stay current? How do you make sure that you're in enough shape to be faster than your friends when the bear is chasing you. Because it's not
Well,
just
it's
one bear
IAM
chasing you; it's
has
a bunch of them.
at the very basic level, it's the thing we've been saying over and over again. IAM is a program. IAM is not a project. And you've got to, if you're grassroots or you're the IAM practitioner, IAM program manager within your organization, or for whatever reason you've decided this is an important ball, I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to run with it. In other words, you have the title, you don't have the title, but you realize it's important, is scream that message and evangelize that message 360 degrees, which includes up the chain. The executive team really needs to understand that this can't be something you just cherry pick. You just do IAM. This year's the year of IAM. Next year's the year of data loss prevention, or like forget about that. IAM is every year for the rest
Yeah.
of your life.
Yeah, that's right. For the rest of your life, it's forever. All right, we've been going for about half an hour. Do you want to get into some of these statistics that we found around insider threats?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have to at least share the document because some of these things are just
yeah.
spot on.
This is something from techjury.net. Again, we'll put the link to this in our show notes, but let me just kind of scroll down here, kind of see the summary of things that are happening. 2,500 internal, this isn't even just external, internal security breaches daily. That's a lot of
That's the one
threat.
that jumped out at me. I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
that's a huge number.
Yeah.
Internal.
Yep. So this is, I think, goes back to that question of, do you trust your workforce? Which, we kind of put the tweet out there about insider threat. Someone's paying $20,000, whether it's Lapsus or someone else. How are you putting the appropriate controls in place to counter those insider threats? Because, roughly a third of globally, which is the second stat there, and we've used this before when we've been doing kind of our daily work, is where are threats coming from? Generally, rough math, 2/3 external, 1/3 internal. And that internal can certainly be very damaging, as we're seeing with Okta, but it usually relies on a few different factors. One of the things that tends to come up is that supply chain attack, which is exactly what happened to Okta. In this case, it was one of their suppliers who got breached. And typically, supplier identity is not well managed or not consistently well managed within an organization, right? How many times do we go into a customer conversation with one of our clients and, yeah, we do a great job. We have this great, authoritative source for all of our employees. Okay, well, great. What do you do about your non-employees, contractors, consultants, et cetera? I don't know. There's a spreadsheet somewhere, or we don't care. It's not our job. We only handle employees. Not to pick on HR, but that is not a great position to be in.
Yeah, I mean, I've struggled with that one for as long as I've been in consulting, which is, what is HR's role within the organization? It's to, manage the people that work here.
Yeah, it's not
just people
it's not
who
employee relations. It's human relations.
right. That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's as simple as that. So anyway, that was the statistic, that first one there that just like jumped out at me. If you kind of scroll down, I picked out a few of them. Number 11 and number 14 were ones that I highlighted.
Number 11, it will take a business an average time of 197 days to identify a data breach.
I mean, that's a punch in the gut, right?
Too late.
It's too late.
Yeah.
It's too late. But that's the whole point that I was making earlier, I think, with, knowing what data, ensuring the right people have the right access, but also that what are they doing with that access? Because if you can't say that, then you probably have a gap in terms of tracking what is being done with access. And if a breach takes place, you're probably not going to recognize it. So that investment needs to be made, because I think it's almost, sometimes we talk with clients that, yeah, we haven't been breached. You almost think like,
You don't know if you've been breached.
You don't know if you've been
breached yet.
You don't know if you have or you haven't. You probably don't have the controls to really know.
Yeah. Well, I was doing a training earlier this week on identity and access management for some auditors, and he was like, "Oh, well, we don't have to worry about people having the wrong access because we have access reviews." When are you doing access reviews? Oh, we do it once a year. Oh, okay. So by the time you've identified that the access is inappropriate, the damage has been done again. So
Right.
you
And
can't rely on that.
we also know that there's so much rubber stamping going on. Don't worry, we do access reviews for 3,500 applications once a year. So
Hmm.
as a manager who has 20 employees has to review their access across a possible 3,500 applications.
Yeah,
Yeah, how
I'm sure they're
much?
doing a real effective job at that.
Right, and I'm sure that they have roles that they actually understand what those roles do and whether or not they're appropriate for their job. A lot of times, let's face it, folks who are managers believe their role is to ensure that their employee remains productive over that the organization remains secure. I'm not saying everybody thinks that way, but I bet you a lot of people do.
Yeah.
Are they really going to be focused on taking access away from people that they know are good employees and that they personally trust? Like, Jeff, I personally trust you. But I think if my
You
role is
shouldn't,
as
man.
well, I do, and I think as my role is information security, even though I trust you personally, that doesn't mean that I shouldn't. And I said if my role is information security, what the analogy that we're talking about though was the business manager. So if we're in like a finance department and I trust you, I think, yeah, like I don't want to take your access away, some role away that might prevent you from doing the job that you need to do. I trust you. You're a good guy. That's part of the problem.
Yeah.
Should be
There's
least privilege. So
exactly.
number 14 was the next one that I highlighted,
Okay.
which that big booger right there. Um, Number 21.
2,500. That is a lot. 21. Let's see. Here we go. Fishing. Wait, no, that's not the right one.
Yep.
Yeah, 21. Fishing.
Phishing attacks. I mean,
Yeah.
it still comes down to this basic blocking attack. And I think the next one I have is emails. Yeah, so number 21 and 22 is kind of like, the way people are getting this access is still, um, the tricking people.
Hmm.
I think 21, a lot of it can be mitigated with multi factor authentication. It can't be 100% solved with multi factor authentication. I think passwordless gets us, and biometrics gets us there a bit more. But I think sometimes people, I mean, it's been proven recently that people click accept even when they shouldn't, even when they're not trying to access the system to get away from being nagged about it. And then the last one about emails are responsible for 94% of malware. I don't even know what to think about that or what to suggest about that, but that
Well,
hurts my
email's the
brain.
front door. That is your public address. I mean, everyone knows it or can find it out relatively easily. I can tell you from my recruiting days when I was doing IT recruiting, it was a big business to try and get one of your contacts to give you the Rolodex, essentially, for the company so that you knew who the managers were so you could call on them to see if they needed, resources.
Right.
Now it's everyone has an email address, and you're sending spam and other phishing attacks to it. People click on things, and I don't know how you solve for that other than having good filters in place to try and detect malware on your email systems, or looking for nefarious messages and things like that. Mark as spam, mark as phishing, and kind of do that. But even with all that today and all the improvements in it, it's still happening. People are still going to click on stuff. They're going to see that, invoice.pdf, unpaid. They're going to click on it. That's going to spawn something else. And the invoice PDF is fine. But inside the invoice PDF, click here to pay takes you to the bad spot. And then now
Yeah.
you're compromised.
Right.
Yeah.
So the last one I did have is a little out of order, number 6.
Let's go up 6. This one right here.
Find it difficult to determine the actual. So this kind of goes with that number 11, which was that, it takes 200 days to figure out that you have an attack. Well, on top of that, stats show that 85% of organizations said they find it hard or difficult to determine the actual damage of an insider attack.
Yeah, they don't have
Yeah,
good inventory.
that's kind of
They don't know
scary, right?
Yeah, they don't know what all that person may have access to, or whatever else might be going on. No IT asset, database, things like that. I mean, it's once
They
you're in,
don't
the
have the
damage is kind of done.
logs.
Yeah, how far did the tendrils go in the organization? And one account might have been compromised, and what if they compromised someone else's account? Now you're spider webbing to a whole bunch of different stuff. So
But it
you got to
also
make sure you
goes
have it
back to
covered.
the point that I was making. Like, so I was saying you got to have the logs, right? But you can't have the logs just based on like IP address. That this IP address attached to this database or something like that. It's got to go back to the identity.
Yep.
So now that we can see the identity, but I think there's probably to some extent people may be able to spoof other identities, which is another issue. But let's just say from the standpoint of the attack is leveraging one identity which is stolen from somebody, you should be able to tie that back, and that should make it into your logs. Otherwise, you have very little hope of figuring out how far the attack went.
Yeah, I think having the logs is one part. What do you actually do with the logs is the other part. Right? It's great to collect them when no one's looking at them, or there's nothing analyzing them and bubbling stuff up. They don't really help you again until it's too late. So how do you become more proactive
Yes,
with it?
it's true. It's true. I mean, that's the second aspect. But if you don't have the logs, you have no hope.
Yeah. Anything else on
Because
this
I
list you
think
want
if
to?
you have, well, if you have the logs, I guess, just to one last point on this. If you have the logs and then you have a breach and you tie it back to Jeff Stedman's account, now you can go into the logs and look for, well, what did Jeff Stedman's account
Yep.
access? You know, will it maybe help you prevent the attack? No, that step won't, but it might after the fact tell you how far Jeff Sted. And one thing that we could be concerning is, oh, Jeff Stedman's account was using the Microsoft Active Directory users and computers, and he may have been creating some accounts as backdoor. So now we have to go through our AD security logs to see if he was creating accounts.
This guy Jeff
Jeff, that
Stedman
Jeff
sounds like
Stedman guy,
he
man,
sounds like it. He sounds real sus, for sure. Um,
super sus.
yeah, let's get to a question from our guy Brandon, who is always with us. Um, Happy Friday to you as well. What is the difference in controls or training between fishing versus whaling? So fishing being, you're targeting a specific area versus whaling, you're going after really high value targets. So, if a fish is you're targeting, one person, a whale would be
That's
considered.
spearfishing, right? So
Yeah, good.
spearfishing is one person,
Yep.
but I guess whaling is like you're spearfishing
A
a
really big
whale.
fish. Yeah, exactly. So, what is the difference in controls or training between the two? I don't think there needs to be too much difference because both, and I'm happy for you to disagree with me, but I think the training and the controls are probably the same. The only difference would be the awareness of if I am considered a whale, making sure that I know that I am going to be a target versus maybe a more general, like, okay, we know everyone is a target. That kind of gets lost in the shuffle of all the trainings that we have to do. But I see a lot of times, specialized sessions with executives at a company, CEOs, other people as part of the C-suite, VPs, the leadership, et cetera, whatever it might look like. They might have a dedicated session just for them where the CISO is more hands-on with them to make them aware of you're going to be a target. Here are things to look for. We want to make sure that your account is secure, so we highly encourage MFA or maybe even mandate it. And maybe it's we don't allow SMS for you specifically because you are such a target, and SMS is no longer, as secure as other methods of MFA. So I think the controls might be slightly variant as I go back on my word here, but I think the overall message is probably the same. It's more of the awareness that, hey, Jim, you're a big fish. People are going to try and get after you. I need you to be aware of that. I need you to take that into, concern or, as part of your thought process when you're clicking on things. You're going to be a target. Be aware of what it is. And here are some of the things that we're doing in the IT side to help you out. You've got MFA. Let me walk you through the setup, a little more white gloves, treatment. Here's what you should be looking for. If you ever see this prompt on your phone and you're not expecting it, do not hit approve, right? A little more customness as it kind of goes through it.
Yeah. Cool question by Brandon. It's interesting. The people you picked as the whales were not the people I was thinking of. So the
Yeah.
whales I was thinking of were, your system administrators, the people who are responsible for your GitHub,
Oh, they're whales
people
too, for
who
sure. Yeah.
right. And so but then you start, well, how many whales can you have? Is like 50% of your workforce becomes whales?
If you're engineering heavy,
Potentially.
maybe. Yeah.
Well, think about, we're a consulting firm. We all work with customers. We all have customer data.
Yeah.
Almost
We're all
everybody in
whales.
our company, yeah, is way more than 50%.
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple things there. I think your first point was spot on, which is that you have to have a security program, or you have to have a education awareness program. That awareness program should have some advanced features where, like, you're helping people spot the types of phishing campaigns that happen. So, I found it kind of like annoying at first how our company sends like these fake emails, but you get really good at spotting them, and it probably trains your mind to get better at spotting spam. I think security awareness plays an important role because I think it's low dollars, and the amount of benefit that you get from spending those low dollars. I think you get a good return on your investment. At the same time, I don't think you can say, like, okay, our main control is security awareness. Like, that's
Yeah.
what we're
We told
relying
you
on
once
here.
5 years ago, and that should be good enough. Or we tell
Or
you
even
once
if we
every
tell
year.
you every day,
Yeah.
we tell you, or we tell you all the time, and we expect that you're not going to fall for a phishing campaign. You almost still have to assume that somebody's going to fall for a phishing campaign. You still have to you have to log access to your systems and things like that. So
Trust
I guess
but
that's what
verify.
trust but verify. But that's what I was getting at with that, is that I think awareness is probably the same, like, core principle, and it's got a certain amount of value as a control. Then I think there are certain populations that you have a special messaging to, and I think that um, by doing that, you let people know that this is actually something that you need to be concerned about because you're special. Someone came to me and said, had a message like that, like, you need to have extra awareness because the kind of access you have is special. I think I'd step it up. System administrators and stuff like that, maybe they should know it, but I think that's where Brandon was going, is those folks. And I think that makes sense to, also tailor the message towards them.
Yeah. Be aware of the threats, educate, over communicate, whatever it may be. But good question, Brandon. Thanks for that one.
As usual.
As usual, yes. All right, we've been rambling here for almost 50 minutes, so we should probably get things wrapped up. Any final thoughts, Jim?
No, I'm
You're
ready
done
for the weekend.
All your thoughts are done.
I'm ready for the weekend. I started watching basketball again last night, and there were some upsets and some really good games. I'm not a Duke fan, so I lived in North Carolina for a while, and this is one of the places I figured out, really, because when I moved there, people were like, "Who do you like, UNC or Duke?" And my initial answer was, "Well, both." That makes sense, right?
Yeah,
That's
right.
kind of like,
No, you cannot do that in the sports world. If you say both, like no, this is okay. Now I'm speaking in superlatives, but I have no respect for people in Chicago who say, "Oh, I like both the Sox and the Cubs." No, you pick one and you ride or die.
well, this is a very similar scenario, but it's even worse because at least the Sox and Cubs for years would never play each other, right? So that heated rivalry, but Duke and UNC play each other. They're in the same city, right? They're both national programs, and their fans hate each other. And I went to I went to the NCAA tournament one year, and Duke and UNC were playing in that same venue, but they didn't face each other because they were in different parts of the bracket, or different sections, whatever. But basically, when UNC was playing, all the Duke fans would cheer for whoever UNC was playing. When Duke was playing, all the Duke fans would. You get the point. So
Yep.
I realized, and
The
I
enemy
went
of
with
my
the
enemy
UNC.
is my friend.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend, and I went with UNC. But I'd like to see Duke do well and UNC do well so that they can meet in the tournament and play each other at some point. I think that would be really fun.
I think it would be a decent matchup. I don't really get too much in the college sports. We talk about that in the podcast. doesn't really interest me, but it's cool to see the Cinderella stories, or I'll catch a good game or something towards the end to see how
The
things
thing that
works out.
blows me away is like how many 7 foot tall people there are in this world,
Uh,
because it didn't seem like it was that way when we were growing up.
yeah, I don't have to worry about that. So I'm a shorty, so I'm all good with it. At least I fit into an
Well,
airplane seat. How about that?
yeah, I mean point guards are like 6'5" now.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I think we've rambled enough. Let's go ahead and
Now,
wrap
you
it for
think?
this week. Check out the podcasts. A whole bunch of links on the screen you can see there. We've got Dan Creed from Meta, aka Facebook. He's coming out here um, Monday, March 28th. And then we've got Julie Smith after that for Identity Management Day 2022, which is April 12th. Her episode will go out on the 4th. I still need to work on getting that one edited, but that was a fun one too. And yeah,
And
I know we've
Dieter,
missed.
and Dieter's the current one that's out.
Dieter's the
And
current one. That was a
an
fun one.
awesome episode. Yeah.
Yeah, he is so well in tune with identity data fabrics and really the construct of how do you make sure you've got your identity data where it needs to be. Definitely something to check out. And we've been kind of absent the last couple of weeks. Again, we're trying to be consistent with it, but work gets in the way sometimes of these live streams. But we'll try to be back again next week. And I guess with that, we'll go ahead and sign off. Thanks everyone for being part of this, and we'll talk with everyone in the next one.
Thanks.